My CEO wife, Sophia, actually thought I was weak and could be bullied. She recklessly left traces of their love everywhere with the intern, David. David was even more shameless, sending me their intimate videos one after another in private, wantonly provoking me. Just when he thought he had completely subdued me, on my birthday party, I went wild and directly turned into another person, James. Not only did I play their intimate videos publicly in front of everyone, but I also pinned David, the lover, to the ground and gave him a good beating. Even Sophia didn't escape my wrath. I slapped her 18 times on the spot. Later, she knelt on the ground, crying and begging for my forgiveness. Unexpectedly, not only did I not accept her apology, but I was also determined to make them lose everything and destroy their lives. She never dreamed that there were two personalities hidden in my body. The weak me had died, and now what remained was green light god of war James. The story is about to begin. If you like it, remember to like and subscribe. I was sitting on the rooftop, with a tall building beneath my feet. I said to the void, James, I'm giving you this body. Come out. I stood on the edge of the rooftop, tottering, but I was certain that James wouldn't stand by and watch me die. I hadn't taken the medicine prescribed by the doctor for a long time, just waiting for this day. I waited for a long time, and just when I was about to give up, James finally appeared. James was another personality hidden in my body. He said lazily, What, are you willing to let go of your beloved Sophia? I looked into the distance and replied firmly, Yes, I have let go. Memories sliced through my mind like a sharp blade. That day, I somehow opened the surveillance of Sophia's lounge and saw a scene that I never wanted to see in my life. The wife who said she loved me was passionately entangled with the new intern in the lounge. I closed my eyes, not wanting to face it, but the moans of excitement still clearly reached my ears. The man said triumphantly, So, Ms. Sophia? Who makes you more crazy between me and your husband? Sophia's forehead was covered with glistening sweat, and it took her a long time to squeeze out a few words. It's you, of course. My heart suddenly tightened, as if it skipped a beat, and I didn't want to look any further. I just glanced roughly at the fragments on the phone screen. It turned out that in the past year, they had had affairs here dozens of times. My thoughts returned to the present, and I spoke again. In 7 days, this body will completely belong to you. The doctor prescribed me a medicine. As long as I take it, one of us will surely disappear. James, are you listening? 7 days later was my birthday, and it would also be my death day. When I was a child, I was calm and introverted. I was dragged to the toilet by my classmates and slapped, but I didn't even have the courage to tell the teacher. I could only hide in the corner and cry secretly. My classmates, seeing that I was easy to bully, carried out bullying against me for more than a year. When my classmates locked me in the bathroom cubicle again, James appeared. He kicked open the bathroom door and took me home. The next day, James went to school and beat up all the classmates who had bullied me. Since then, no one dared to bully me again. Later, whenever I was in great pain, James would appear. I took one last look at the sky on the rooftop, and a tear rolled down the corner of my eye. This time, I decided to let James replace me forever. I returned home and saw the slippers at the door, knowing that Sophia hadn't come back yet. She said she was going on a business trip with the intern David for a week. In David's moments, those passionate, ambiguous, and indecent pictures deeply stung me. Standing by the window and looking out, I could see the golden auditorium in the distance, where we got married. At this moment, gorgeous fireworks were being set off, almost lighting up the pitch-black night sky. The last time I saw such fireworks was on our wedding anniversary. At that time, Sophia said affectionately, My fireworks only bloom for you. I sneered. Her fireworks were no longer for me alone. Because just now, the confirmation order for the fireworks that Sophia ordered was actually sent to my phone, and I, smiling, signed it directly. I went back to the second bedroom and lay down. Since I found out about Sophia's betrayal, my mind has been full of memories of our youth. We met in college. She took the initiative to confess to me, and even proposed to me first. She said, Marry me, Mark. I can't wait anymore. Later, she had always been very assertive. When I was still working step by step, she founded Sophia Group with her best friend. Sophia, holding my arm, said confidently, What others have, Mark must also have. All of this is for you. However, after we had everything, Sophia became restless. When Sophia came back, I was already lying in bed. There was a noise outside the door, and I skillfully closed my eyes. The door of the room was gently pushed open, and Sophia climbed onto the bed carefully. Looking at my weak breathing, she whispered, Why did you sleep in the second bedroom again? Do you want me to sleep with you here? I didn't open my eyes, just said lightly, I don't sleep well and want to be alone. Sophia gently kissed me on the face and said tenderly, Then I won't disturb you. Good night, Mark. It was still that familiar smell of cigarettes. I had also smelled this smell in the hidden compartment of the company office. The next morning, I was woken up by Sophia. Suddenly, I felt dizzy, nauseous. Just before I fainted, I fell straight to the floor of the bedroom. "Mark, why are you so hot? Don't scare me." Vaguely, Sophia anxiously dressed me, and with the nanny on either side, they helped me into the car and rushed to the hospital at high speed. She said anxiously, "It's okay, Mark. We'll be at the hospital soon." When the car reached the emergency entrance of the hospital, before the door was even closed, Sophia helped me and rushed directly into the emergency department, shouting, "Doctor, nurse, my husband has a high fever. Come quickly." A nurse recognized her at a glance and said, "Isn't this Ms. Sophia of Sophia Group? Come on, just put Mr. Mark here." The doctor gave me a comprehensive examination. It was just a fever caused by a bacterial infection, but Sophia was extremely nervous. She was still wearing slippers on her feet. I looked weakly at this female CEO in front of me with a tired face. If I didn't know about her affair with David, I might still be immersed in the false image of a happy marriage she had woven. My phone suddenly rang. It was a message from David. He provoked, "Mr. Mark, faking illness isn't interesting. Do you believe that as long as I want, I can take her away from you at any time?" I glanced at Sophia beside me. She seemed very tired, with her hand against her temple, looking exhausted. If it were before, I was fully confident that Sophia would stay with me. Because before, she also rushed to the hospital in such a high-profile way. At that time, there was a serious problem in the company, and she was urgently needed to go back to take charge. But she insisted on staying until my drip was finished and sent me home before leaving in a hurry. At that time, the company lost tens of millions. But now, I didn't have that confidence. Her phone was placed upside down, and it vibrated slightly. Sophia's phone film had somehow become anti-peeping, and I couldn't see anything. Sophia said with a things difficult for look, "Mark, there's an urgent matter at the company." I looked away and said calmly, "You can go. I can manage by myself." Sophia breathed a sigh of relief, kissed me deeply on the forehead, and said, "I'll deal with the matter at hand and come back to accompany you as soon as possible." I looked at her leaving back and said lightly, "No need." The nurses beside were still whispering, excitedly shipping RCP. One said, "Look at Ms. Sophia. She's beautiful, cool, and rich." Another replied, "Yes, and she's so protective of her husband. She specifically asked to give her husband a gentle injection just now. The forced love of a female boss is really addictive. Sister, can you not be so strict about gender? Yes, such a perfect wife, anyone would like her." Unfortunately, her acting skills were too good. Her fake infatuation deceived everyone, but she still couldn't control her restless heart. But I was tired and didn't want to act with her anymore. My nose was sour and uncomfortable. I thought, forget it, just let it be. Until the drip by my hand was finished, Sophia still didn't show up. When the nurse pulled out the needle, it brought out a long bloodstain, and the bright red blood soaked the entire tape. The nurse quickly apologized, and even the head nurse came over. She said, "I'm really sorry, Mr. Mark. She's new and doesn't know better." I shook my head. This pain was nothing at all. I said, "It doesn't matter." Then I got up and walked out. This sentence sounded familiar. The head nurse told me from behind, "Mr. Mark, press on it." I ignored her and let the blood flow down my hand. The day after David became the president's assistant, he deliberately spilled tea on my newly bought suit pants. He pretended to be panicked and kept wiping my pants, with an expression of being humiliated by me on his face. Before I could say anything, Sophia spoke first, "Mark, he's new and a bit clumsy. Don't be angry with him." David also hypocritically said, "Mr. Mark, you won't blame me, will you? How much is this pair of pants? I'll compensate you." Sophia naturally stood in front of David to help him out. "All right, you can go down first." I shook my head politely. At that time, David wasn't as blatant in his provocation as he is now. It was Sophia who gave him the confidence to provoke me. It seemed that from that day on, Sophia's balance had tilted towards David. I should have noticed it earlier. I thought, what would James do? He would probably punch back. Not only that, but he would also make Sophia fire him. Sometimes, I really envied James for being able to live freely and unrestrainedly. But fortunately, this day wasn't far away. After returning home, I took all the photos of us to the yard and burned them. The thick smoke attracted the nanny. She asked with concern, "Mr. Mark, what are you burning? Do you need my help?" I smiled faintly, but then I started to cry. I turned my head away, and a teardrop fell. Seeing that I didn't reply, the nanny left awkwardly. Looking at the billowing smoke, I knew that our past would disappear like these photos. There could be no me in this world anymore, nor anything related to me, as if I had never appeared in this world. The stuffiness in my heart seemed to ease a bit. Until the evening, when Sophia came back, she brought a small box. She walked up to me, hugged me tightly, pressed her cheek against my chest, and said coquettishly, "Okay, stop burning." "Mark, I was so scared yesterday. I called you many times, but you didn't respond. You know, I can't live without you." As she spoke, Sophia's arms hugged me even tighter. Could she really not live without me? I thought to myself. I lowered my head and saw a faint red mark on her exposed neck. I suddenly felt nauseous. I pushed away her arm, but she coquettishly hooked her arm around my neck again. Sophia thought that I must be angry because she didn't accompany me to get the injection in the hospital just now. Her mark had always been like this. Sophia smiled and said, "They say there's nothing that a game can't solve. Take a look. Do you like this game console?" I looked at this thing in front of me, which was either a refurbished machine or a fake one, and sighed helplessly. She really didn't understand games at all. And no matter how you look at it, this had nothing to do with playing games together. Seeing that my face didn't look good, she still touched my forehead and asked with concern, "Are you still feeling bad? I'll go and cook some porridge for you. I was wrong yesterday, leaving you alone in the hospital. If you don't like this, tell me what you like. No matter how expensive or hard it is to buy, I'll get it for you." "Like it," I replied lightly, but my face was very ugly. Hearing my answer, Sophia's hanging heart finally dropped, and she hugged me tightly, saying happily, "My Mark is the best." Sophia was about to go to the shower room to take a bath. She noticed the delicate medicine bottle on my desk, with only one pill inside. She subconsciously picked it up and looked at it again and again, asking suspiciously, "Mark, is there something wrong with you recently?" I turned around and saw the pill in her hand. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly walked up to her, took the medicine bottle from her hand, and held it tightly, smiling and explaining, "It's nothing. It's the medicine prescribed by the doctor to help me sleep. It's very expensive." Sophia hugged me. Knowing that I often had insomnia, she said, "No matter how expensive it is, as long as it's useful for your condition, buy a box and put it at home so that you can have it whenever you feel uncomfortable." I smiled and said, "Who would prepare so much medicine? All right, you go take a bath first." While Sophia was taking a bath, I carefully hid the medicine bottle. That night, when I opened my Moments, I saw David's updated post. It read, "Someone's love is overflowing." The picture was of a floor full of famous brand watches, sunglasses, and shoes. Someone commented below, "Many of them are limited edition." David's pride seemed to overflow from the screen. He replied, "Of course. The one who loves you will surely understand everything you need." Yes, she really didn't understand the things in my hands. In the window of the picture, a familiar figure was reflected. I could never mistake that figure. It was hard for Sophia to run around between us. She should be called a time management master. I turned off my phone, and a sharp pain came from my heart. I knelt down on the ground in pain. It turned out that when people feel heartbroken, they really can feel it. Fortunately, everything was coming to an end. The next day was the anniversary of Sophia's company's establishment. Every year, Sophia would take me to attend, and this year was no exception. She prepared a very handsome white high-end customized suit for me. The fit was perfect, making me look even more upright, which was very suitable for my current status. I attended in full dress as usual, but I couldn't force a smile on my face anymore. Sophia held my arm and walked into the grand hall of the banquet center. Reporters and the public relations department started taking pictures one after another. A stable marriage relationship was the best publicity for Sophia. The opening dance had always been between me and Sophia. To prepare for this opening dance, I found a teacher and learned for a long time, just not to embarrass Sophia. But different from David, who came from a dancing family, before we finished, David led a dance partner onto the dance floor, with pride in his eyes. The melodious music suddenly changed to a passionate Latin dance music. David, in a black Latin dance costume, led a red-skirted dance partner into the arena. The sexy and enchanting dance partner didn't take away the light from him at all. His constantly swaying waist made people's blood boil. He danced back and forth with the music, and almost instantly, he attracted everyone's attention. Someone asked curiously, "Who is this?" The president and her husband haven't finished dancing, and he rushed onto the dance floor for the opening dance. "Isn't he afraid of losing his job?" Another replied, "Oh, this is Ms. Sophia's special male friend. Otherwise, who would be so bold?" The person suddenly understood, no wonder. He's here to provoke. The whispers of the guests clearly reached my ears. Sophia thought she had hidden it well, but in fact, the whole company was laughing at her. And the ambiguous interaction between David and the female dance partner deeply stimulated Sophia. I couldn't help but glance at Sophia. Her eyes were fixed on the hand of the female partner on David's waist. Several times, David's face was close to the dance partner's, and the ambiguous atmosphere reached its peak. Her fingertips holding the wineglass turned slightly white. I knew she was jealous for another man. When the dance ended, David politely thanked everyone. Sophia put down the wineglass in her hand, turned to me, and said, "Mark, I'm going to socialize. Take care of yourself." I nodded, watching Sophia's eager leaving back. Sophia walked up to David, gave him a look, but David didn't pay attention. Seeing him ignore her like this, Sophia couldn't hold back the anger churning in her heart. She glanced around, grabbed David's arm, and walked away quickly. I wanted to go to the balcony of the banquet hall to get some air. This place made me feel suffocated. But when I passed by the door of the lounge, I heard familiar voices, Sophia and David. There were mixed voices of men and women coming from inside, one after another. Sophia scolded, "You went to so much trouble just to make me jealous, right? I said before, you're not allowed to appear in front of me." David's voice was accompanied by a heart-pounding breath. He said charmingly, "Miss Sophia, it's because I miss you so much. But did this trick work on you? I want you to know how I feel when you're in that man's arms. I feel 10,000 times more sad than you." Sophia said helplessly, "Don't do this again next time." I bit my lip tightly, clenched my fists, but my face was warm, and I had already burst into tears. My first reaction was to run away. I quickly walked to the balcony and took big gulps of fresh air. The scene just now almost made me suffocate. At 10 p.m., with a bang, the fireworks bloomed on time. The guests gathered around, taking pictures of me and applauding. Probably everyone thought the tears on my face were out of touch. I was the husband of the much-admired female CEO, and these fireworks all over the sky were set off just for me. But Sophia was nowhere to be seen. Only I knew that she was in the arms of another man, doing the most disgraceful things. Just as all the guests were whispering and speculating curiously about Sophia's whereabouts, a burst of music sounded, and everyone turned their eyes to the center of the dance floor. The spotlight shone on Sophia. It was hard for her to come and act affectionate right after having an affair. The spotlight followed her as she came to my side. She lifted the hem of her dress, took my hand, and personally put a watch worth tens of millions on my wrist, saying affectionately, "Mark, thank you for your company all the way. We will definitely be together for a lifetime and grow old together." But I clearly saw that she had a silk scarf around her neck, trying to cover the red marks left by the passion just now. A lady beside us started exclaiming, "Isn't this the one I saw at the auction a few days ago? There's only one in the world, and Miss Sophia actually got it." Miss Sophia doesn't buy jewelry for herself, but she prepared a watch for Mr. Mark. Is this the benefit of having a female CEO wife? What good fortune! Indeed, what good fortune! When the dinner was coming to an end, I felt extremely tired and dragged my heavy steps back to the dressing room. But I didn't expect that David was already waiting there. The door of the dressing room was wide open. He stood with his arms crossed, a meaningful smile on his face. The Latin dance costume on his body was torn to pieces, and the dense red marks on his neck silently indicated the intensity between him and Sophia just now. Seeing me come in, David raised the corners of his mouth, a hint of mockery in his eyes. I didn't expect Mr. Mark to be so tolerant. If it were someone else, they would probably have beaten me up long ago when seeing their wife being affectionate with someone else, right? He laughed triumphantly, and his hand casually brushed the marks on his neck. The watch on his hand, exactly the same as the one on my wrist, shone brightly under the light. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "You're just a kept man. I thought Mr. Mark was a charming and tough guy. But now it seems you're just a useless good-for-nothing. Sophia said that if it weren't for the fact that you're an orphan, she would have divorced you long ago. And yet you still cling to her." I had been suppressing my anger. My clenched fists had veins bulging, and my fingernails almost dug into my palms. But the next second, the control of my body was suddenly taken away. Everyone watched in shock as I raised my hand and punched David hard on the nose. I exclaimed, "James." This punch was too heavy. David was directly sent staggering and fell heavily on the coffee table beside him. The glass on the coffee table shattered all over the floor. Just then, the door was crowded with people. I turned around and saw Sophia standing outside with a large number of guests and reporters. They had all witnessed this scene. Sophia shouted, "David!" There were whispers all around. "Mr. Mark usually looks gentle and refined, But he really shows no mercy when hitting someone. Look, the assistant's face is almost distorted. Sophia rushed to David's side, knelt down, and carefully examined his injuries. David looked pained and said, "Sophia, help me. I think my nasal bone is broken." Sophia looked up at me. She had never called me by my full name before, but now she shouted, "Mark, what are you doing?" She asked someone to help David up. When passing by me, she said softly, "Mark, I don't seem to know you anymore." She paused slightly, adjusted her emotions, and then continued, "I'll deal with this first. I'll ask the driver to take you home later." Sophia was also blaming me. She also thought it was my fault. Facing a person who was destroying my marriage, didn't I even have the right to teach him a lesson? Gradually, the crowd dispersed, leaving me sitting alone in the empty room, looking at the broken pieces of the coffee table on the floor. I heard James' voice in my head, "Mark, I'm sorry. I really couldn't hold it in." I looked out of the window, wanting to cry but no longer able to. I shook my head and said, "It's not your fault, James. You did what I've always wanted to do." But I still cared about her in my heart. In fact, David was right. I was a coward. The driver stood at the door and asked cautiously, "Mr. Mark, Miss Sophia asked me to take you back." I shook my head and said, "You go back first. I want to be alone for a while." The driver nodded slightly and backed out. The phone screen lit up again. It was a message from David, room 203, Sacred Heart Hospital. "Do you want to come and see the real her?" I pressed the phone off and stared blankly at the star-dotted sky outside the window. James couldn't help but speak again. "Mark, don't tell me you're still going." I asked, "Why not?" I raised my hand to look at my phone and called a taxi. Before I left, I was determined to find out how much pretense and deception there was. The city at night had shed its prosperity. It was already the early hours of the morning, and there were few pedestrians on the street. Suddenly, a lightning bolt flashed outside, and I shivered. It was already late autumn, and the weather was getting colder. Soon, the taxi stopped at the entrance of Sacred Heart Hospital. Following the information left by David, I walked to the door of the ward. Through the slightly ajar door, I saw Sophia's mother and sister sitting on both sides of David's hospital bed, holding his hand with concern. Sophia's mother said, "David, you have to be more careful in the future. Stay away from Mark next time. This time he hit you, and next time, you don't know how hard he'll strike." Sophia's sister said, "Yeah, brother-in-law. I don't know if that Mark did it on purpose. He has azoospermia, and he won't let you help my sister have a baby." Sophia pushed her sister from behind and said, "Who are you calling brother-in-law? You only have one brother-in-law, and that's Mark." Her sister stood up and argued with her sister unconvinced, "I don't care. I can't just watch him delay you. You've been married to him for so long and haven't had a child. It must be his problem. You know how much Mom loves other people's children. He's depriving you of the right to be a mother. It's too much." Her sister was 5 years younger than Sophia. When Sophia and I first started dating, she always followed us around. At that time, she also affectionately called me brother-in-law. Because of James, I had always wanted to have a sibling, and I treated her like my own sister, giving her all the good food and drinks. I didn't expect that a David could make her willingly call him brother-in-law. I thought at least my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were on my side. It's true that my health wasn't good, but I didn't have azoospermia. Sophia often socialized and drank outside, and her body had long since broken down. I was the one who picked up the test results. It was Sophia who couldn't have children. Afraid that she would be sad, I lied to her that I had azoospermia. Over the years, the family's urging for a child had been constant. At first, Sophia would say that she was afraid of pain and didn't want to have a child. Later, she said nothing, and I was the one dealing with it. Now I'm in a really bad situation. Sophia's mother spoke, interrupting my thoughts. "David, this ancestral jade pendant is for you. When Sophia gets pregnant, don't worry about the house and the car. This child will be the only heir of our Sophia family." My eyes were already blurred. I watched her hand the jade pendant to David. I remembered this jade pendant. At our wedding, my mother-in-law held my hand and said, "In the future, you'll be my own son. When you have a child, I'll give you this jade pendant." Now it seemed that I had long been abandoned by them. Sophia lowered her head at the back and didn't dare to speak anymore. She thought that after having a child with David, she would give me some money to send me away casually, and never let David appear in front of Mark again. Then she would say it was Mark's child, so as to solve the conflict between Mark and the family. Over the years, the family had been urging for a child, but she couldn't bear to let Mark take the risk of having an operation, so she could only come up with this idea. But she didn't know that the price of doing this was to lose him forever. I didn't want to listen anymore. I turned around and left, disappearing into the empty corridor of the hospital. Sophia said, "No matter what you say, my husband will only be Mark." After saying that, Sophia picked up the bag beside the bed and prepared to go home. She felt uneasy. She had just left Mark alone in the hotel and hadn't had a chance to explain to him properly. She had to think of a way. Sophia's mother and sister looked at each other, and then still looked at David and said, "Don't listen to her. When Sophia has your child, you'll be a real family of 3. Yeah, we all recognize you as our family." David laughed. He was secretly overjoyed. He knew that a child could capture a woman's heart. Because after having a child, a mother would focus all her energy on the child. Then, as the child's biological father, he could smoothly enter the Sophia family. As long as he tried a little harder and got rid of Mark, the Sophia group would be his. I walked aimlessly on the street. The sky suddenly poured down with heavy rain, drenching me from head to toe. My clothes were already soaked. I walked sorry state in the rain, trying my best to digest what I had just seen. But in my memory, my mother-in-law's family all like me. When we got married, knowing that I was an orphan, my mother-in-law said, "Good boy, from now on, you can regard Sophia's home as your own. We'll all be your family in the future." I also tried my best to be a good son-in-law and a good brother-in-law. Now it seemed that David had long replaced my position, and perhaps they had known about David's existence for a long time. When I lost my use value, I no longer had a place in their hearts, including in Sophia's. A red Ferrari sped by, splashing water all over me. Vaguely, I saw the familiar license plate number 520ZH. Finally, I couldn't hold back my emotions and broke down crying in the rain. The rain flowed down my cheeks. I asked, "James, why? What did I do wrong? Why are they all treating me like this?" James was there, but he didn't speak. He didn't know how to comfort me. And he could clearly feel the heart-rending pain. Sophia's car backed up and stopped beside me. She got out of the car in a panic and wanted to hold an umbrella for me. Looking at me sobbing continuously in the rain, her heart was almost broken. Sophia helped me up and asked, "Mark, what's wrong with you? Why are you squatting here in the rain? Your health is already poor. What should I do if you get sick?" The heavy rain washed my cheeks. I tried hard to open my eyes and look at the woman in front of me. But clearly, she had already cheated on me. How could she so righteously say she loved me? I didn't say anything. Then, Sophia hugged me tightly. Sophia said, "I know. Did I speak too harshly to you just now? I apologize to you. Forgive me, okay? Forgive?" It was impossible. After returning home, Sophia helped me into the bathroom, put my pajamas aside, adjusted the temperature of the bathroom, and filled the bathtub with water. I sat blankly on the toilet. Sophia squatted down, carefully pushed aside the wet hair in front of me, and asked, "Honey, are you angry because I sent the employee to the hospital?" I can explain. After all, there were so many reporters and guests present. This was the best way to handle the crisis. Otherwise, if the video of you slapping the employee is posted online tomorrow, it will not only cause trouble for the company but also for you. The company doesn't matter, but I'm afraid you'll be cyber-bullied. Sophia showed a coquettish smile and said, "Mark, do you want me to help you take a bath?" I then reacted and shook my head to refuse. Sophia just thought I was being coy. She said, "Okay, I won't tease you anymore. Then take a good hot bath. I'll wait for you in bed." I closed the door and looked at myself in the mirror. I said, "James, I'm really tired." James still didn't speak. The person in the mirror smiled. Although it was a bit ugly, I knew that the inarticulate James was trying to comfort me. After getting everything ready, I lay on the bed. Sophia affectionately got into my arms, and her hands wandered around my ears and neck. Thinking of the scenes in the lounge, my eyes turned cold, and I felt extremely disgusted in my heart and stomach. I pushed Sophia away and said, "I'm tired." Sophia then stopped her movements, gently kissed my shoulder, and said, "Okay, then I won't bother you." Her hands holding me became tighter and tighter. She had an ominous premonition, always feeling that I was getting farther and farther away from her. Tomorrow is Mark's birthday, and there is still a chance to make up for everything. But she didn't know that tomorrow was also the day I decided to leave. My birthday party is held in different clubs in this city every year, and this year is no exception. Sophia rented the largest garden venue. A birthday party was held more grandly and luxuriously than other people's weddings. Early in the morning, Sophia went to supervise the venue layout. This birthday party must not go wrong. Before leaving, Sophia hugged me and said, "Good husband, I've prepared a suit for you." It's in the cloakroom. The driver will come to pick you up later. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in it. I watched her leave, and the door closed heavily. I went back to the cloakroom and picked up the suit Sophia had prepared for me. It was a high-end custom-made suit by a famous designer. She had prepared everything for me, just like a high-end figurine, never asking for my opinion. Back in the bedroom, I took out the bottle of red pills given to me by Dr. N. He said that as long as I took this pill, only one of James and I could survive. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. I held the pill in my hand and sat at the table. James appeared in a timely manner. He said, "Mark, have you really thought it through? If you take it, you'll never see your Sophia again." I smiled and said, "James, if it was you who was born from mom's womb, it would be great. Then I wouldn't have to come to this world, wouldn't have met Sophia, and wouldn't have lost myself in love." James said, "But it's not your fault. It's their problem." I was very determined. Looking at James in the mirror, I said, "If only I could touch you." James had a serious expression, but he also shed tears. How could he not feel sorry for me, his younger brother? He rubbed his face and said, "You've thought it through. If I really take over your body, I won't let Sophia off easily. Do you really not want to give her another chance?" I laughed bitterly. I had given Sophia too many chances. Before I could refuse, David's text message caught my eye. He wrote, "Mark, considering today is your birthday, I'll let Sophia go back and accompany you for 2 hours tonight. The rest of the time is mine." I said, "See, James, what else do I have to be nostalgic about?" I put away my phone, opened the medicine bottle without hesitation, and swallowed the pill directly. I just felt myself getting more and more sleepy. My body slumped on the bed, and I fell into a deep sleep. A tear rolled down from the corner of my eye. Finally, I whispered, "Sophia, goodbye forever." Just as Sophia was using the excuse of preparing a surprise for Mark at the birthday venue tonight, she was still in entanglement with David upstairs. She said, "Recently, Mark has become suspicious. You'd better be honest. If he finds out about your existence, you know the consequences I've told you." David's hand was dishonestly placed on Sophia. He said, "If he was going to find out, he would have found out long ago, Sophia. You still have to accompany him tonight. I don't ask for much, just a little while, until the start of your party." David touched her all over. He knew Sophia couldn't resist him like this. After the chaos, Sophia went to the shower room to take a bath. David unlocked her phone, sent a message to Mark, and then deleted it. Sophia asked, "I heard the sound of a phone just now. Who was it?" David replied, "Just a harassing call." Sophia smiled and said, "Here's this card for you. Go buy the luxury watches and cars you like." In Sophia's eyes, David was the easiest to deal with. Just give him money. But she didn't know that David's appetite had long been whetted, and he didn't care about this little anymore. The dinner was held as scheduled. Everyone had arrived and was going about their business as planned. Everyone was looking forward to what surprises would be presented tonight. After all, every year Sophia would prepare jaw-dropping gifts for her husband. Last year, she gave a whole wine estate. The clock struck 8, but there was no sign of Mark at the main entrance. The guests whispered among themselves, speculating whether this was part of a show put on by the couple. Sophia told her assistant to go and check if something was wrong. Just then, the roar of a motorcycle engine came from the entrance, and James appeared at the banquet gate. He wasn't wearing the high-end suit Sophia had prepared for him. Instead, he had on a pair of black pants, black combat boots, and a black leather jacket. The moment he took off his helmet, he shocked everyone present. This rebellious youth, wild and unrestrained, was in sharp contrast to the gentle and refined Mark they knew. Sophia had never seen Mark like this, nor had anyone else at the scene. Someone said, "Is this Mr. Mark?" "Yeah, you know, Mr. Mark actually looks really handsome like this." Even the host was rubbing his eyes, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. James' lips curled slightly. He walked along the red carpet. Only then did Sophia clearly see that it was indeed her Mark. A smile returned to Sophia's face. This Mark was different, but he attracted her even more than before. She said, "Honey, happy bye." Before she could finish the word birthday, there was a loud slap. James raised his hand and slapped her across the face. Everyone looked at each other in dismay, not knowing what was going on. Sophia was stunned. She had never been hit before, especially not in public like this, which was something the gentle Mark would never have done. She covered her face and said tremblingly, "Mark, what are you doing? There are so many people watching." James smiled and pressed the remote control in his hand. In an instant, everyone turned their eyes to the other side, and the venue erupted. On the big screen were the eye-catching images of Sophia and David in the office cubicle. The crowd gasped in shock, some covered their mouths in embarrassment, some blushed and dared not look, and some malicious people took out their phones to record, but the phones were all snatched away by the security guards. James looked around and saw David, dressed in a sharp suit, standing in the crowd. He too was shocked by the images on the screen. James picked up the microphone in his hand and said to David, "Mr. David, would you like to explain how you ended up in bed with your boss?" The crowd followed James' gaze and found David in the crowd. Some people couldn't help but curse, so this is the lover who destroyed someone else's relationship. Just look at him, he's not a good guy. Sophia is really despicable. She even brought her lover to her husband's birthday party. Subsequently, James walked into the crowd, grabbed David by the collar, and dragged him in front of Sophia. David didn't even dare to breathe, kneeling on the ground in a sorry state. Another punch landed, and this time James used all his strength. He had long wanted to hit this man. Every time David had provocation Mark, and when Mark, being meek-tempered, didn't dare to fight back. People in the crowd cheered, "Beat him to death. Such a scumbag deserves to die. Mr. Mark, we support you." Sophia's assistant shouted, "Turn off the screen. Where's the manager? Turn it off." James looked at Sophia's face, which turned pale and then red, and felt even more pleased. "Sophia, our game has just begun." David covered his face, sitting on the ground, not daring to make a sound. Sophia seemed not to notice. She grabbed James' arm and said eagerly, "Honey, listen to me explain." James naturally didn't want to listen to her. He directly threw all the evidence and the divorce agreement in Sophia's face and roared, "Sign it." Sophia carefully looked through the documents James handed her. The 4 big characters' divorce agreement were clearly written on it. On the spot, she tore the documents to pieces and cried, "Mark, I was wrong. I don't want to divorce you." James laughed, a bright laugh full of mockery. He said, "It doesn't matter if you don't sign. We can go through legal procedures." With that, he turned around and left gracefully. By the time Sophia chased out, dragging her dress, James had already ridden away on his motorcycle and disappeared into the distance. That day's incident almost became the talk of the upper-class circle. Sophia lost all her face. The stock price of Sophia's company plummeted, and it had several consecutive daily limit drops. The board of directors complained, and several partners called to cancel their cooperation. Sophia's well-maintained image of a happy family collapsed instantly, and David also became the target of public criticism. For several days, he hardly dared to go out. Someone found out his home address, painted red paint on his door and cursed him, saying that he would die a bad death for destroying someone else's relationship. Some even sent him a blood-stained doll. He lived in constant fear. Sophia didn't understand why Mark had changed so much. She didn't know that the soul that had loved her deeply had been replaced. It wasn't until a lawyer came to her, saying that Mark had started the divorce lawsuit. Sophia went home, wanting to ask Mark for an explanation. In her impression, even if Mark knew about her affair, he wouldn't have retaliated so drastically. He had always been a gentle and considerate man. When had he ever been so fierce? However, no matter how she searched, there was no sign of Mark in the villa. She called the nanny, only to see the nanny wearing the scarf she had brought back from Italy for Mark last year around her neck. She asked, "Where's the master? And what's this scarf around your neck?" The nanny stammered, quickly taking off the silk scarf from her neck, and said, "A few days ago, I saw the master burning photos in the yard. Yesterday, he gave me this scarf, saying he didn't want it anymore. Each of us received a gift from the master." "What did he say?" Sophia's hands clenched tightly. It turned out that Mark had long been prepared to leave and was just waiting for this day. The nanny said, "The master said we had worked hard during this period and this was a reward for us." Sophia questioned, "The master was acting so abnormally. Why didn't you report it to me earlier?" The nanny muttered to herself, "You haven't been back to live here much either." Indeed, Sophia had come back very rarely recently. Since she started preparing to have a baby with David, she had made excuses to talk to Mark every now and then, and he always readily agreed. It seemed that at that time, he had already prepared to take revenge on her. Sophia felt as if she was being suffocated by the pent-up anger in her heart. She searched their room but could hardly find any trace of Mark left. It was so clean that not even a single hair was left. Mark really didn't want her anymore. Not only that, because of what happened a few days ago, her phone was almost ringing off the hook. Her assistant called to report, "Miss Sophia, I've had the video of that day taken down from all platforms." But before the assistant could finish, Sophia couldn't hold back her anger and shouted, "No matter what you do, I don't want to hear or see anything about that video anymore. And what are the PR and legal departments doing? If they can't handle such a thing well, you can all pack up and leave. Sophia threw her phone, and it broke into pieces. Losing Mark was something she couldn't accept more than being humiliated in public. That night, James kicked open the door of the doctor's clinic and cursed, "Why did you give Mark that medicine? Mark is dead and can never come back, right?" The doctor was Olivia. She had long expected James to come and was not surprised by his actions today. Instead, she had been looking forward to it. She just looked at James, whom she had been longing for day and night, and asked herself in her heart, is it wrong to fall in love with a personality? Seeing Mark constantly suffering, was it wrong for her to choose to let James wake up and fulfill everyone? James grabbed Olivia's arm, his eyes wide with anger, and said, "I'm asking you a question. Answer me." Olivia adjusted her glasses, then held his burning palm in return and said, "Wasn't Mark in pain? Don't you really want to live once?" This question silenced James. He had once thought that if he could fully control this body and not share it with others, that would be great. But he cared more about Mark. He was not willing to kill Mark just for his own resurrection. Olivia stood on tiptoe, pulled his collar, and kissed him deeply. Her kiss was passionate and aggressive, as if she had been waiting for this day for too long. James didn't refuse. He knew very well that he also liked Olivia. After all, he couldn't hide his love in front of a psychiatrist. James cashed in all the luxury items Sophia had given Mark, picked a large flat in the most expensive real estate area in the city, and gave the movers a lot of tips, telling them that they could watch the UA Storyhouse channel if they had nothing to do. It was really interesting. James sat on the sofa, looking at the data on the iPad, and the corners of his mouth curled slightly. He was constantly paying attention to the public opinion about Sophia and David. No matter what counter-measures the PR company came up with, he had a way to release another explosive piece of news. In the living room, Olivia looked at James on the sofa, who was completely focused, with a smile. She knew that such days would not last long, so she cherished every minute and second with James. The negative public opinion in the past 2 days had put Sophia in an unprecedented crisis. "Miss Sophia, we haven't found any entry or exit records of Mr. Mark, but we have found a lot of purchase records," the assistant reported to Sophia. Sophia's eyes lit up immediately, and she asked, "What did he buy?" The assistant said, "Not only did he buy, but he also sold. Mr. Mark sold many of the gifts you gave him before, almost all of them were put on the internet for sale. Then he used the money he got to buy several properties, including houses and shops." Sophia thought to herself that this didn't seem like something Mark would do. In her impression, Mark had a low material desire and didn't care much about money. No matter how expensive the luxury items were, they couldn't win his favor. Sometimes, even a bowl of porridge she cooked for him personally could make him happier. But why? Why did he do such a thing? She said, "Hire a private detective to keep investigating. Be careful not to expose yourself." The assistant nodded and replied, "Yes." As if thinking of something, Sophia quickly drove home. She rushed into the bedroom, wanting to find the bottle of pills she had seen before. Her intuition told her that the pill was not simple. But when she rummaged through the bedroom, she couldn't find the bottle with the pill. She shouted, "Nanny!" The nanny replied, "What's the matter, ma'am?" Sophia said, "When you cleaned the room, did you notice the medicine on the master's bedside table? There was only one red pill in a transparent bottle." The nanny thought carefully for a moment and then said, "Yes. That was the medicine the doctor prescribed for the master after he went for psychological counseling." Sophia asked, "Psychological counseling?" "Yes, the master often had insomnia. After going to the hospital, the doctor said it might be a psychological problem, so he went to a psychological clinic. The doctor said Mr. Mark was anxious and depressed and needed to take medicine regularly. But that delicate little bottle, I saw it for the first time. Did Mark have depression? She never knew, or rather, she had never cared. For a year, Mark had been troubled by insomnia, and she didn't know. She only knew that Mark often had trouble sleeping. Every time she woke up at night, she could see Mark sitting beside her. She just thought his sleep was light and never thought about it in this way. Could this be the reason for his drastic change in personality? Sophia then asked, "Do you have the address of that psychological clinic?" The nanny thought for a while and said she didn't know. Every time Mark told the driver the location. She added, "The driver knows. The master always tells him the address." Before the nanny could finish, Sophia had already rushed out, found the driver, got into the car, and said, "Go to the psychological clinic the master often goes to." On the other side, James wouldn't give up. He followed Olivia to the consulting room. He said, "Bring Mark back to life. Do you hear me?" James slapped the table. Olivia looked at the documents in her hand, unmoved. She had spent so much effort to bring James back. How could she give up easily? James said, "Since you can bring me back to life, you can also bring Mark back to life. I'm willing to give this body back to him. It's his in the first place." Olivia didn't look at him, just said, "Have you ever gotten a response when you called him in your mind?" James stood there, stunned. Indeed, he hadn't. Before, whether James called Mark or Mark called James, the two could respond. They could talk in their minds and sense each other's emotions and pain. But he hadn't felt anything that didn't belong to him for a long time. It was as if he had always lived in this body and Mark had never existed. Olivia smiled gently, looked up at James, and said, "This decision was made by Mark himself. I didn't force him. He just didn't want to live anymore." Then, Olivia walked up to James, hugged him tightly, and said, I also want you to live a good life instead of him. When he came to me for treatment, his depression was already very serious. Letting him go might be a relief for him." Olivia wiped the tears from the corner of James' eyes, put her arms around his neck, and kissed him on tiptoe. Just then, the door was pushed open with a bang, and Sophia's angry roar rang in their ears. "What are you two doing?" Sophia's eyes were like sharp knives, as if they would pierce the two of them the next second. She gritted her teeth, her body trembling slightly, as if trying to suppress the surging emotions in her heart. Anger and jealousy intertwined in her heart. The pent-up emotions of so many days seemed to have found an outlet, ready to burst out the next second. Before James and Olivia could react, Sophia had rushed over, grabbed Olivia by the collar, grabbed her hair, and slapped her again and again. Olivia endured Sophia's slaps in pain, with many scratches on her face and messy hair. The next second, James grabbed Sophia's clothes tightly and pulled her off Olivia. Then, he slapped her hard. Sophia's eyes were blood red, looking at James in disbelief. She finally stopped and looked at James, the disbelief in her eyes almost overflowing. Sophia said aggrievedly, "You actually hit me for another woman?" James said, "You can't stand seeing us kiss, but when you were having an affair with David, did you ever think about how I felt?" Sophia's eyes dimmed, but the remaining bit of reason still made her grab James' arm. She said, "I haven't signed the divorce agreement yet. I'm still your wife." James didn't look at her. He pushed her away and bent down to help Olivia, who was lying on the ground, up. He said, "When you were with David, you didn't remember I was your husband. Now I'm making room for you. Shouldn't you thank me?" Watching James carefully wipe the blood on Olivia's face, Sophia's anger rushed to her head. She shouted, "Mark!" James looked back at her without any emotion. Olivia let out a cry of pain, and James carefully checked her injuries. Sophia clearly saw the worry in James' eyes, the kind of worry that used to be only for her. She couldn't bear it and wanted to pull James to her side. James forcefully shook off her arm. Seeing James take out his phone and press the alarm number, she said, "Hello, I want to report an incident of someone causing trouble." Sophia never thought that Mark would call the police on her. A strong sense of loss of control filled her whole body. She really seemed to be losing Mark. She said, "Mark, I was wrong. I was just confused for a moment. What do you want me to do to forgive me?" The high and mighty Sophia lowered her stance, almost pleading. James smiled bitterly. If Mark could see her like this now, would he feel better? Then, he composed himself, looked at her coldly, and said, "If I say I want you to die, will you die?" Seeing that Sophia didn't speak, James helped Olivia up and said word by word, "Sophia, in my heart, you're nothing." The police came quickly, and several people were taken to the police station. Not long after, Sophia's mother and David rushed in. "My daughter, Sophia." Sophia's mother saw James sitting on the chair, walked up to him, and raised her hand to hit him, but James caught her hand in mid-air and threw her aside forcefully. Sophia's mother was stunned for a moment, then cursed, "You're such a bad luck person. You actually sent our Sophia to the police station. You're so cruel-hearted." James didn't want to pay attention to her. His eyes were fierce, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Say one more word, and don't blame me for being rude." Sophia's mother was scared by this Mark. She had never seen Mark like this. In her eyes, Mark had always been a gentle and refined gentleman. To put it bluntly, he was cowardly and easy to manipulate. What was going on today? David next to her also started his false, caring act, saying, "Mr. Mark, if you have any anger, you can vent it on me. After all, Sophia is your wife. If this gets out, it won't be good for either of us." Only then did James notice that there was another person here. He smiled and said, "So you know she's my wife. Did you ever think about the damage to her reputation when you were sleeping with my wife?" The police station instantly fell so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. If it weren't for the inconvenient location, James really wanted to punch him again. David took 2 steps back and fell silent. Sophia's mother immediately stepped forward and said, Sophia has been married to you for so many years, and you've wasted her prime youth. You're incompetent, and you even deprived her of the right to be a mother. Think about it, what did you do wrong? The police officer next to them couldn't stand it anymore and said, all right, this is a police station, not a place for you to make a scene. If you want to quarrel, do it at home. Discuss it among yourselves. If you reach a settlement, sign here, and you can take the person away. If not, you'll be detained for 7 to 15 days. It's up to you. James curled slightly. He turned his head and glanced at the two of them. Sophia's mother and David's faces had turned extremely ugly. The angry words she had said earlier were now like slaps, hitting her hard in the face. Sophia's mother wanted to step forward and persuade him but couldn't utter a single word. Sophia glanced at James. Since he could call the police, it was not impossible for him to have her locked up now. She called out, Mark. There was a hint of pleading in Sophia's eyes. She had never been so down and out in her life. James helped Olivia, who was sitting beside him, up and said, You're the one who got hurt. You decide. Olivia didn't even think about it and directly said to the police officer, No settlement. James smiled. It was the same decision as his. He gently stroked Olivia's cheek and asked, Does it still hurt? This seemed deeply Sophia's heart. Her Mark really didn't want her anymore. He could even send her to prison with extreme coldness. David knelt down in front of James with a thud and pleaded, Mr. Mark, please, spare Sophia. She did this for the good of both of you. James sneered and said, Cut out your moral, kidnapping act. If you really feel sorry for her, you can go in and accompany her. After saying that, James helped Olivia and left without looking back. James took Olivia home and carefully applied medicine to her with a cotton swab. He said, I remember you used to practice women's martial arts. A Sophia is no match for you. Olivia smiled, but the wound cracked a little, and she pursed her lips in pain. She said, How do you know I practiced that? James said, I saw it on the bookshelf in your office. In fact, James was very smart. He was more rational than Mark and had a good memory. Looking at James like this, Olivia would still be attracted to him again and again. Olivia lowered her eyes, not daring to look at him. She said, After all, I feel guilty for stealing someone else's husband. Besides, if I don't get hurt, how would I know that someone cares about me so much? James pinched Olivia's cheek hard and said, Little schemer. Olivia was still a little worried about James' safety. She said, Sophia's emotions are out of control now. You'd better stay away from her. James' expression remained unchanged, but the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He said, Don't worry. Her mind should not be on me now. Sophia would soon receive a package sent by James. It was filled with evidence of Sophia's affair with David, as well as text messages, photos, and videos of David provoking Mark. James spent the whole night organizing them. Every time he saw those, his heart would still ache. It wasn't jealousy but hatred. He hated that the grievances Mark had suffered before had nowhere to be vented, and he hated Sophia's fickleness and ungratefulness. 7 days later, Sophia's hands were shaking as she opened the express delivery. She had once thought that she had hidden it well. Right under Mark's nose, she had an affair with David, and she was once obsessed with the excitement this behavior brought. But she had never thought that she would lose Mark because of it. The paper was crumpled in her hands. It turned out that David had been provoking Mark in front of him a long time ago, trying every means to stimulate him. Mark's depression was related to him. She had clearly warned David. Sophia drove to David's residence. Her subordinate kicked open the door of the room. Under Sophia's instruction, he grabbed David by the neck and pressed him firmly against the wall. David's face turned red from being choked, and he said with difficulty, Sophia, how could you? There was a surging anger in Sophia's eyes. She shouted, Didn't I tell you not to let Mark know about our relationship? You sent him so many provoking messages in private. Who gave you the courage to do this? David, you're courting death. David was almost choked to death. He kept slapping the bodyguard's arm. Sophia motioned for her subordinate to let go. David slid weakly down the wall to the ground, coughing so hard that tears and snot flowed. Finally, he looked up at Sophia, crying, and said, Sophia, once a person wholeheartedly likes someone, they will want to possess her. I'm no exception. What's so good about Mark? Don't forget, it was he who called the police and arrested you. We could have lived happily as a family of 3. David cried more and more violently, collapsing on the ground. Sophia looked at him coldly and said, I've always been Mark's. Who do you think you are to compare with him? Sophia took 2 steps back, closed her eyes, and then said, "You'd better behave yourself. If I find out that you go looking for Mark again, don't blame me for being ruthless. I mean what I say." Sophia returned to the empty house, dismissed all the servants, and hid alone in the bedroom, drinking box after box of wine. Her memories were filled with beautiful and happy pictures of her and Mark. She still couldn't believe why Mark was so heartless. Suddenly, the picture of Mark and Olivia kissing appeared in her mind again. Her hand was on Mark's neck, and his eyes were full of love when he looked at her. The floor was full of empty red wine bottles. When the assistant came to report on work, he found her lying in a pile of red wine bottles, covered in blood, red wine and vomit. When she woke up in the hospital, the assistant stepped forward and said, "Miss Sophia, the doctor said you can't drink like this anymore." Sophia looked at the ceiling, with a look of despair, and said, "Tell me, has the investigation made any progress?" The assistant sighed, picked up the folder, and continued, "We've found the gentleman's residence. It's an apartment in Repulse Bay." Sophia got out of bed without thinking, not even having time to change her clothes, and said, "Take me to find him." The assistant supported Sophia, knowing that he couldn't stop her. Sophia closed her eyes in the car. Her face was terrifyingly pale, and her stomach was cramping again and again, making her frown tightly. The assistant looked at her through the rear view mirror and sighed deeply. He had witnessed the two of them all the way. When she was with David, the assistant knew something would happen and had expected this day, but he was helpless. Downstairs, Sophia saw Olivia hugging Mark's neck through the floor-to-ceiling window. The two of them looked very sweet. Sophia couldn't hold back anymore. She rushed upstairs and slapped the door hard, shouting, "Mark, come out. We're not divorced yet, and you're flirting with someone else." James and Olivia in the room were startled by the sudden shouting. Olivia walked over and opened the door, saying, "Miss Sophia, do you miss the days of being detained? Haven't had enough?" Sophia stepped forward and grabbed Olivia's sleeve tightly, asking, "Do you know he's a married man?" But she didn't expect to be directly pinned against the wall by Olivia with a counter-grappling move. Olivia said, "So what if I know? So what if I don't? Before talking about others, please look in the mirror and see what disgusting things you've done before." Olivia let go of Sophia's hand, but the force didn't stop, and Sophia fell heavily to the ground. James walked up to her, put the divorce agreement beside her, and said, "You came at the right time. Sign it." Sophia didn't have the strength to stand up. She turned her head away and said fiercely, "Impossible. Mark, I don't believe you can fall in love with someone else so quickly." James forcefully pulled Sophia up, looked into her eyes, and said word by word, "Sophia, I don't love you anymore. If you still care about our past relationship, sign it." Sophia didn't want to lose Mark and was still trying to save the situation. She called her assistant and said, "Transfer all the real estate, stocks, and cash in my name to Mark's name." Hanging up the phone, she looked at the man in front of her hopefully and said, "I'll give you everything I have. Let's not get divorced, okay? Give me a chance to turn over a new leaf. Let's start over, okay?" She had no other choice. Now she was willing to do anything Mark asked her to, except get divorced. James smiled at Sophia and said, "Impossible. I will never forgive you in this lifetime." He thought to himself, "Mark, Sophia is repenting to you. Can you see it?" When the security guard invited Sophia out, it suddenly started to pour outside. Sophia stood downstairs of James' house, reluctant to leave. James and Olivia stood by the window, watching Sophia, who was drenched like a drowned rat downstairs. James said, "Mark also collapsed in such a heavy rain. She should taste this feeling too." That day, Mark knelt in the rain and asked James what he had done wrong for Sophia to treat him like this. How he wanted to hug his younger brother and tell him that he had done nothing wrong. It was Sophia who had done wrong, and she would get her due. Now, James had done it, but compared to the harm Mark had suffered, it was still far from enough. Downstairs, Sophia stood in the rain, as if this could wash away the pain in her heart. After a while, the raindrops hitting her head turned into the thumping sound of raindrops hitting an umbrella. She thought Mark had finally softened his heart and was willing to forgive her. But when she looked up, it was Olivia who came. There were still scratch marks on Olivia's face from Sophia's attack a few days ago. She said, "Miss Sophia, does torturing yourself like this work?" Sophia looked at Olivia stubbornly. There was anger surging in her eyes, along with a hint of jealousy. Sophia replied, "This is between us. It's none of your business, an outsider." Olivia ignored her and continued on her own. "The first time he came to me, he was very ill." She was talking about Mark. She continued, "At that time, his somatization was already very obvious. He not only had insomnia, a low mood, but also had symptoms such as headaches, limb paralysis, tinnitus, and slurred speech." "You didn't notice?" Sophia was slightly stunned. Mark had always been a quiet-tempered person. She had never noticed, or rather, her mind had never been on him. She only thought about earning a lot of money for her husband to spend. Olivia said, many times, he showed signs of wanting to commit suicide. Sophia's hands clenched slightly, her fingernails digging into her palms, as if this could relieve the dull pain that made her heart feel numb. Olivia didn't say anything more, just handed her the umbrella. Sophia thought, was Mark, who had always been by her side, really in so much pain? The pictures of Mark and Olivia being entangled played over and over again in Sophia's mind. Until she saw the lights upstairs go out, Sophia couldn't bear it anymore and fell in the rain, murmuring, Mark, were you in so much pain before? James looked at the transfer and agreement sent by the assistant, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Things were going as he had thought, and everything was going smoothly. The next day, there was no sign of Sophia downstairs. She had been taken away by an ambulance. But James didn't care much. What he was thinking about now was taking revenge for Mark. Sophia's real estate was transferred to Mark's name, including the house David was living in now. James came to David's residence with a group of workers. He raised his hand and gave a gesture to the locksmith behind him. The locksmith opened the door in no time. David's expression flashed with panic when he saw the people breaking in. He shouted, Mark, how did you know this place? James walked into the living room, looked around, and sat down on the sofa. He said, I'm here to take back my house. Is there a problem? David said, what do you mean it's your house? Sophia bought this for me. David couldn't believe it and took out his phone to call Sophia, but the other side didn't answer. David paced back and forth in the hall, making call after call. James looked at David's appearance and sneered, it seems your Sophia doesn't care about you anymore. David didn't stop what he was doing and kept making calls. James hushed him, took out his phone, and said, how about I call for you? Then he dialed Sophia's number and put it on speaker. Almost instantly, the other side answered the phone. Sophia said, Mark, you're finally willing to contact me. David's face looked ugly, but James handed the phone to him. David said, Sophia, Mr. Mark has broken in with a lot of people and is going to kick me out. Come quickly. There was a moment of silence on the phone. Sophia spoke, directly dashing all of David's hopes, he has the final say. David said, Sophia, you can't treat me like this. James raised his eyebrows, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he took the phone back from David. Sophia wanted to say something more, but James hung up mercilessly. Turning to look at David, James said, now, give up? David's eyes were red. He said, Mark, don't think you're so great. You're just an unwanted orphan. Without Sophia, you're nothing. James ignored him, looked up, and signaled the workers to start working. He said, I don't want anything here. Move it all out. The workers were like the officers in ancient times who raided a house, quickly starting to move the furniture. David shouted, there are a lot of my own things here. You can't take them away. James walked up to him, lit a cigarette, and said, your own things? Which thing on you wasn't bought with Sophia's money? Even the clothes you're wearing now, if I ask you to take them off and get out of this house, you have to do it obediently. Otherwise, I don't mind sending you in for a few more days. David wisely shut up and stopped talking. Just as the room was almost emptied, Sophia's mother and Shumei came. David seemed to see a savior and ran to the two of them. Sophia's mother glanced at James and wanted to strike, but was intimidated by James' fierce eyes. Sophia's mother said, Mark, this house was bought for David by Sophia. You have no right to kick him out. James took the transfer agreement and slapped it in front of Sophia's mother, smiling and saying, take a good look. Now the owner of this house is me, and I have the right to deal with everything in this house. Sophia's mother looked at it, her head almost steaming with anger. She gritted her teeth and said, do you have any manners? Anyway, I'm your elder. How do you talk to an elder? James smiled and said, elder? After I divorced Sophia, what kind of elder are you? Seeing that she couldn't beat James, Sophia's mother grabbed David's hand and said, let's go, let's go. We can't afford to provoke him, but we can hide from him. Shumei also said, that's right, brother-in-law. We'll go back to the villa. Can we still leave you without a place to live? James stopped the three of them and said, by the way, the villa you live in is mine now. Considering you have a lot of things, I'll give you 3 days to move out. Sophia's mother turned around in surprise and asked, what? Sophia gave you that villa too? James smiled and said, to be precise, all the real estate, cars, and stocks in her name. She had an affair during the marriage and should leave the marriage with nothing. I think it's reasonable for me to ask for these. When Sophia's mother heard this news, blood rushed to her head. She was extremely angry and was about to step forward when Shumei stopped her. Shumei said, "Mom, let's go back and think of a way first." Sophia's mother seemed to come to her senses and said, "Yes, yes, David. Don't worry, with us mother and daughter here." Before leaving, she didn't forget to leave a harsh word, "Mark, you'd better not be too proud. Wait until I ask Sophia to deal with you." James watched the three of them disappear from his sight. He couldn't help but recall that Mark had once truly treated them as his family. Now it seemed that they didn't deserve it at all. In the following days, Sophia didn't bother him, and James had a very comfortable life. He had long planned to let Olivia bring Mark back, no matter what method was used or what price he had to pay. Everything he was doing now was paving the way for Mark's future life. James bought 2 shops. He used one to open a gallery for himself, and rented out the other. This way, even if Mark wanted to live a laid-back life in the future, he would still have an income. The style of the gallery was personally arranged by James and Olivia, almost entirely in the style that Mark liked. James felt very gratified seeing Mark's paintings hung on the walls. When the sunlight hit the paintings, casting a pale yellow glow, he found it extremely healing. Whenever Olivia was free, she would come to accompany him, and they both cherished every minute and second they spent together. James got his driver's license and bought a commuting car for Mark. It wasn't very expensive, but its safety performance was top-notch. Mark had once mentioned to Sophia that he wanted to learn to drive and get a license, but Sophia disagreed. She thought driving was dangerous and said that if Mark wanted to go out, she could provide him with a car and a driver. It seemed like concern, but in fact, it was control. Considering Sophia's feelings, Mark chose to be an obedient husband and follow all her arrangements. Gradually, he lost himself. But he didn't realize that it's only when you hold the steering wheel in your own hands that you feel secure. James carefully selected a paper crane pendant, which he sewed by himself. Inside, there was a peace amulet he prayed for Mark. He hung it on the car with great care, hoping it could bless Mark with safety. Sophia really quieted down for a while. It was said that she had been in the hospital for a long time and had been in the intensive care unit several times. The next time James saw her was at the law firm where they were going through the divorce by agreement. Sophia still had the capable female entrepreneur image as before, but she was so haggard that she no longer had her former high-spirited look. The lawyer handed the documents to the two of them, informing them that the divorce procedures had been completed and the property had been clearly divided. All that was left was for them to sign, and they could smoothly finalize the divorce. Sophia had actually started suspecting James a long time ago. She had hired a private detective to investigate. This Mark in front of her, apart from having the exact same face as the previous Mark, didn't seem like him at all. She remembered Mark telling her that he actually had a twin brother when he was a child, but the brother died in the womb. She came to sign the divorce papers this time to confirm her suspicion. Could it be that Mark's twin brother had survived and was now pretending to be Mark to swindle money? Then where was her Mark? In the conference room, Sophia and James sat on opposite sides of the table, each with their own thoughts. The lawyer handed the documents to them and said, "Now, if you two sign the divorce agreement, you can dissolve the marriage relationship." James signed the document neatly, but Sophia remained motionless. James looked at her scrutinizingly and said, "Sophia, there's no possibility for us. No matter what you do now, I won't change my mind. Give up." Sophia's expression was indifferent. She leaned back in the chair, stared straight at James without moving, and said, "You're not Mark." James put down the pen in his hand, leaned back in the chair calmly, and looked at Sophia with a smile. Even if she was suspicious, he was convinced that she couldn't produce any evidence. James said, "Sophia, stop making excuses. It's useless. We're definitely getting divorced today." Sophia didn't respond to his words. Instead, she asked coldly, "Tell me, where have you hidden Mark? I'll agree to any conditions you set." She really couldn't believe that the aggressive person in front of her was the same as the gentle and kind Mark from before. She couldn't believe that someone could change so drastically overnight. James asked, "What do you want me to say to prove that I'm myself?" Sophia stood still and said, "I don't believe Mark would treat me like this, and I won't divorce him. No matter how much you try to cover it up, I'll find evidence to expose your true identity." After saying that, Sophia got up and left. James put away the smile on his face and chased after her. He grabbed Sophia's arm and made her look at him directly, saying, 14 years ago, in the winter, I met you for the first time. I told you that you were the most special girl I had ever seen. The first gift you gave me was a teddy bear from the amusement park. You had saved money for half a year just to celebrate my birthday. You said you liked biting my face, and you called it physiological affection. You said you wanted to have a warm home with me, and you also said you wanted to have 2 children with me. The boy would be as handsome as me, named Ji Chinchin, and the girl would be like you, named Ji Tian Tian. These words nailed Sophia to the spot. The memories they shared together kept stinging Sophia. The person she had sworn to be good to for a lifetime was standing right in front of her. Sophia's eyes gradually turned red with blood, and she stared blankly at this familiar yet strange person. A tear slid down her chin and dropped to the ground. Although she knew the truth in her heart, she still couldn't accept that the person in front of her was really her Mark. She racked her brains to refute, these things can't prove that you're Mark. Maybe he told you about our relationship. Don't waste your efforts. After saying that, she pushed James away and walked away quickly. Sophia. James didn't expect her to back out at the last minute and not sign. Sophia's actions completely disrupted his subsequent plans. In the Twilight Bar, James drank cup after cup. Olivia said, "Come on, James. It's just that the divorce didn't go through. We'll think of another way." Olivia snatched the wineglass from James' hand and patted his back comfortingly. She knew that he was doing all this to pave the way for Mark. As long as the divorce wasn't finalized, he couldn't ensure Mark's safety. In a booth not far away, a pair of eyes were staring fixedly at them. Sophia clenched her fists, raised her head, and drained the wine in her glass. She was certain that the person in front of her was not Mark. Mark was allergic to alcohol. Just a touch of it would make him feel uncomfortable all over and break out in rashes. Once, he accidentally ate a chocolate with liqueur filling, and Sophia accompanied him to the hospital for 3 days of injections. But the man in front of her showed no abnormal reaction after drinking. She kept rubbing her palms, trying to relieve the numb feeling caused by extreme nervousness. If he wasn't Mark, then where was her Mark? Sophia gave her assistant a look. As soon as James and Olivia came out of the bar, they were dragged into a van. James was already drunk and couldn't even walk steadily, while Olivia was knocked unconscious and thrown into the back row. When they opened their eyes again, they found themselves in a secluded factory building. James had a cotton cloth stuffed in his mouth and couldn't speak. Next to him, Olivia's hands were tied and hung from a beam, and her body was covered in injuries. Sophia was sitting aside, eyes closed, resting. Awake? James met Sophia's cold eyes. He shouted and cursed, but it all turned into weak growls. Sophia walked over, lifted his head, and said, feeling distressed, "You know, I feel the same way when I see Mark being treated like this by you." She took the cotton cloth out of James' mouth. James shouted angrily, "Sophia, you're crazy. Do you know this is kidnapping?" The strength of her hand increased, and James could feel her hand trembling. Sophia sneered and said, "I am crazy. How could I not be crazy without Mark? Tell me, where is my Mark? Where have you hidden him?" James had never seen Sophia this angry before. Her eyes were filled with surging anger, as if she would devour him the next second. He had underestimated her level of madness. Well, if she wasn't crazy, how could she have built up her business in just a few years? But he wasn't afraid. James asked with a cold smile, "You want to find Mark?" There was hope in Sophia's eyes. She was right. He really wasn't Mark. But the next second, James' words shattered her. "Mark is dead. He died when you were having an affair, betraying him, and lying through your teeth. You claimed to love him, but you were looking for other men outside and even wanted to have children with them. Can you understand how he felt?" "I can. I deeply felt the heartache, so painful that it was almost suffocating. On those nights when you were with David, he was alone, crying and licking his wounds. Where were you then?" Sophia shook her head, and tears welled up in her eyes and then fell. James sneered, "Now, who are you pretending to be affectionate for? Miss Sophia, are you satisfied now? It was you who killed Mark with your own hands." James' heart also ached. He was even more sad than her about Mark's death. Sophia seemed to go crazy, shaking her head and saying it was impossible. "Mark loved me so much. How could he bear to leave me? No, Mark didn't die. You two must have hidden him." She tightly grabbed James' neck and asked, "Where is he?" James' face turned red from being choked by Sophia. But then Olivia behind him said, "Let him go, and I'll tell you where he is." Sophia's eyes paused slightly, and the strength in her hand loosened a bit. Only then did she remember there was another person behind. James coughed continuously and said, "Olivia, don't say it." Olivia slightly raised her eyes, and her eyes were filled with sadness. She said, "Sophia, have you heard of dissociative identity disorder?" Sophia turned around and looked at Olivia, asking, "What do you mean?" "The person in front of you is Mark, but in this body lives another soul named James. When Mark came to me because of insomnia, I discovered that there were 2 different personalities in his subconscious. The 2 brothers had a very good relationship. When he was with you, the elder brother never appeared. But recently, he came to me and hoped I could help him disappear and hand the body back to his elder brother. So, he is James, not Mark. Mark's soul has died. Sophia laughed out loud, not believing what Olivia said at all. But it seemed that this was the only explanation that could make everything make sense. She said, if it's the same body, then why is Mark allergic to alcohol? But he isn't. Olivia coughed twice and said, let me down, and I'll tell you. Sophia thought for a while and finally decided to listen to Olivia. She was too eager to know Mark's whereabouts. However, the moment Olivia's hands were released, she suddenly slapped Sophia in the face. She had been hanging for a long time, and her arms had little strength, so the slap wasn't very heavy. But Sophia still felt like she had been tricked. She grabbed Olivia's collar. Olivia pushed her away, walked to James' side, and untied the rope in his hands, saying as she did, previous research has shown that multiple personalities can have their own characteristics. Even allergens can be different. The specific reason is still not scientifically proven. You just need to know that this is possible. Not only allergens, but emotions can also be completely separated. Mark likes you, and James likes me. The two personalities also have each other's memories and can feel each other's emotions. But among the patients with dissociative identity disorder I've treated, almost all of them fought desperately for control of the body. Brothers like them, who both want to fulfill each other, I've never seen in my career. Olivia carefully wiped the wounds on James' face. James hugged Olivia, and with a pained expression, he wanted to touch the wound on her forehead. Only Sophia couldn't accept this explanation at all. She grabbed Olivia's collar, but was thrown to the ground by Olivia with an over-the-shoulder throw. Subsequently, Olivia acted as if nothing had happened, continued to help James up, and said, let's go, James. The two of them supported each other and left, leaving only their backs to Sophia. Sophia lay on the ground. She couldn't accept the fact that Mark had left. That extreme despair seemed to engulf her. How could he be so heartless as to leave her? Sophia wandered the streets in a daze. James' words kept echoing in her mind, it was you who killed Mark. You claimed to love him, but you were looking for other men outside and even wanted to have children with them. Do you know how he felt? I deeply felt the heartache, so painful that it was almost suffocating. On those nights when you were with David, he was alone, crying and licking his wounds. Where were you then? Sophia's eyes gradually turned cold. Besides herself, there was another person who hadn't been punished for all this. Sophia came to the place where David was staying temporarily. Sophia's mother had sent her the address before, asking her to go and accompany him more. After opening the door, David seemed to have just taken a bath. He was only wearing a bath towel around his lower body. When he saw Sophia standing at the door, he hugged her tightly, like a wounded puppy, and said, I knew you wouldn't abandon me, Sophia. Before David could finish speaking, she pushed him, shoved him into the room, and closed the door. She tightly grabbed David's neck and slapped him hard. David was frightened by her appearance. He kept retreating on the ground and asked, Sophia, what's wrong with you? Sophia didn't say a word. Her eyes were filled with killing intent. Slaps and punches rained down on David one after another. Then, she grabbed David's hair and dragged him to the bathroom, turned on the cold water, and locked him in the shower. She remembered that her Mark had collapsed in the rain like this, and she also remembered David's provoking words to him. Since Mark's birthday, Mark had been gone, replaced by his elder brother. But the previous Mark, when facing David's provocation, didn't have any intention of hurting David, even though he had been bullied like that. Now, she was going to return everything. David had to endure all the suffering that Mark had gone through. David grabbed Sophia's skirt and pleaded humbly, Sophia, spare me. I know I was wrong. He looked as in a mess as a stray dog, kneeling on the ground, soaked all over. Please let me go, okay? Sophia stood still, looked at him coldly, and finally kicked him hard in the groin with all her strength. David let out a scream and then fainted. Sophia stepped back 2 steps in satisfaction and dialed her assistant's number, saying, come and deal with this. In the following days, Sophia locked herself in the study, constantly looking up information about dissociative identity disorder. Finally, she found a way to bring Mark back. There had been successful experimental cases abroad. Since Olivia could bring James back to life, she must be able to bring Mark back too. She couldn't wait a moment longer. She frantically searched for Olivia's whereabouts. Finally, the assistant said, Olivia was hospitalized because of the previous kidnapping and hasn't been discharged yet. Sophia's heart seemed to skip a beat. She was filled with remorse. She had almost killed the only person who could save Mark. Before going to the hospital, the assistant prepared a fruit basket for her. After all, she was asking for help, and she couldn't go empty-handed. Sophia took the fruit basket and walked to the outside of the ward. She saw Olivia with a bandage still wrapped around her head, and James was feeding her porridge. Memories in Sophia's mind overlapped. When she was in school, some hooligans had tried to bully her. It was a very cliched hero saves the beauty scenario. She got injured, and at that time, Mark was like this, sitting by the bedside, carefully blowing on the porridge in the spoon and feeding it to her mouthful by mouthful. A dull pain came from her heart. The next second, Sophia adjusted her emotions and pushed the door open and entered. The two of them almost turned their heads at the same time. The smile on James' face froze, and he was instinctively a little defensive. He asked, "What are you doing here?" Olivia tugged at James' sleeve and said, "James, don't be excited. Sit down first." Sophia's face didn't look good, but she remembered her purpose. She said, "Ms. Olivia, I admit I was wrong before. I can cover all your medical expenses." Olivia and James looked at each other, thinking that Sophia seemed like a different person today. Olivia asked, "Ms. Sophia, what do you want? Just say it directly." Sophia knelt down with a thud and said, "Only you can bring Mark back to life. Please, I'll give you whatever you want, as long as you can bring him back. I really can't live without him." James' eyes became moist. He wondered if Mark would be happy or sad if he saw her like this. Olivia looked out of the window and didn't respond. Although she had promised James to try to bring Mark back to life, she didn't have full confidence. Also, she selfishly wanted James to exist for a while longer. If Sophia couldn't live without Mark, then could she afford to lose James? Sophia was kneeling for the first time in her life, pleading, "Ms. Olivia." Olivia said, "Go back. I can't agree to this." Sophia had expected Olivia to say this, but she still wanted to give it a try. She pinned her hopes on James and said, "James, don't you want Mark to come back to life? After all, this body belongs to Mark. I've checked the information, and it's possible for him to come back." There was hope in Sophia's eyes. She had always been convinced that Mark would come back. She knelt and moved closer to James. Seeing James' hesitation, she pleaded almost humbly, "You care about Mark too, right?" James pushed her away and said, "You have no right to mention him." Seeing that neither of them gave in, Sophia stood up, placed the divorce agreement and a blank check on the table, and said, "I've signed the divorce agreement. All I want is Mark back. You can fill in any amount on the check. You don't need to reply to me in a hurry. I hope you'll seriously consider my proposal." Sophia didn't say anything more and walked straight out of the ward. She was having a hard time controlling her emotions, and her hands were still slightly trembling. She had offered all the conditions she could, all for the sake of getting Mark back. She understood that asking Ms. Olivia to give up James was just like her not being able to give up Mark, but she had no other options. Inside the ward, Olivia tightly held James' hand. At this moment, they weren't any better off than Sophia. Although they also wanted to bring Mark back to life, it wasn't because of the conditions Sophia had offered. With a choked voice, Olivia said, "At least she signed the divorce agreement. You and Mark are both free now." James nodded and said, "That's right. We'll still follow the plan." After Olivia was discharged from the hospital, James made extensive inquiries and finally found out where David was staying. He also had someone follow Sophia to keep track of her every move. David lived in an old residential building. James thought he had gone to the wrong place and double-checked the address. The David he remembered was refined and handsome and wouldn't have chosen to live in such a shabby place. James covered his nose, as the corridor reeked of pickled vegetables and sewage. Finally, at the end of the corridor, he found David's room. The door was ajar, and James pushed it open and walked straight in. The room was damp, and the window was blocked by the building in front, not letting in a single ray of sunlight. There were sundries piled up in the corner, and there were leftover takeout boxes on the table. David was lying on the bed with his back to the door and said, "Just put the takeout on the table and leave." When he received no response, David turned around. Seeing that it was James, he rolled back over and said, "Come to laugh at me?" James sat down on the sofa and asked softly, "Have you got what you wanted now?" Before he could finish speaking, David suddenly threw off the quilt and sat up. His face was deathly pale, and he stared at James viciously. James noticed a fecal bag hanging from his lower body. James played with his fingers, not intimidated at all, and said, "I'm not the one who did this to you." David laughed, and then started crying. He said, "I know. You want to say I got what I deserved. Yeah, I did. But I still underestimated you, Mark. Ever since I was a kid, my mom didn't like me. She only loved my younger brother and gave him everything. I thought that one day, I'd make a name for myself, earn a lot of money, and then show them. I wanted them to know that it wasn't just my brother who could treat them well, I could too. The first day I reported to the company, I saw you in the crowd. You were so dazzling. But why? We're both human, yet you had so much? So, I wanted to be with Sophia and become someone important. David's tears dropped onto the quilt, pattering. James just thought he was ridiculous. He said, I thought that by getting close to Sophia, one day I'd replace you in her heart and become someone others envied. But I underestimated you. You seem gentle, but you're actually ruthless. Now, I've lost everything. It's all because of Sophia. She ruined me. I'm not a real man anymore, and I'll have to live with this fecal bag for the rest of my life. David's hands kept shaking. For a man, there was nothing more humiliating than this. Looking at him like this, James still asked, why don't you call the police? David stubbornly wiped the tears from his face. He truly loved Sophia. Even though she treated him like this, he couldn't bring himself to turn against her. James asked, is it worth it for someone like her? David smiled bitterly and looked back at James. He said, aren't you the same? I provoked you before, and you didn't fight back, did you? James looked at him, as if seeing the stubborn mark, and replied, that's why I fought back. You have to love yourself first before others will love you. David couldn't refute. He wasn't without the thought of suing Sophia, but he still held on to a glimmer of hope that one day, she might remember his kindness and come back to him. Was it just about the money? Not entirely. He had also invested his feelings. He was serious about Sophia. He had fantasized about the happy life of their family of 3 countless times, but now it was all gone. A few days later, Sophia was arrested, and the whistleblower was David. Having been by Sophia's side for so long, David naturally knew about the illegal activities in Sophia's company. Moreover, he went to the hospital for an injury examination and accused Sophia of maliciously injuring him, causing him to be permanently disabled. He took the initiative to find James, and the two arranged to meet at a coffee shop. David took a sip of coffee and said to James solemnly, Mr. Mark, I'm really sorry. I was the one who broke up your family. If it weren't for me, you've been punished as you should. That's enough for me. As for you and Sophia, even if it wasn't me, there would have been someone else. David lowered his head and remained silent. James asked him, what are your plans for the future? David sighed and said, I want to go back to my hometown, move to another city, and start over. James nodded, as if all the past had faded away with the wind. A warm feeling passed through James' heart. If his life was just this period when Mark was absent, he was content. In the next life, he wanted to have his own life, which would surely be more colorful. Recently, Olivia had been spending a lot of time in the hospital, researching a way to bring Mark back. In fact, she was confident, but she couldn't bear to part with James. This time, if Mark came back, James would completely disappear from the world. Every time she thought about this, Olivia's heart ached as if being cut by a knife. But this was James' wish, and she had no choice. Finally, Olivia's research was successful. The medicine she developed, combined with electroshock therapy, could bring Mark back to life. The time was set for 3 days later, and by then, James would completely disappear from the world. Olivia held James tightly, not wanting to miss a single second. James said, Olivia, do me one last favor. Can you erase all of Mark's memories of Sophia? Olivia held James even tighter and said, even now, you're still thinking about Mark. James smiled and said, I'm thinking about you too. Find a good man in the future, get married, have kids, and live a good life. Olivia's tears dropped onto James' clothes. In the darkness, the two hugged each other tightly. The day before Mark was brought back, James and Olivia went to the prison to visit Sophia. He had thought that he could clear all obstacles for Mark and ensure that his future life would be peaceful and undisturbed. Sophia's face was deathly pale. She was brought out by the prison guards, and her eyes showed no emotion when she looked at them. Both sides picked up the phone, but only James spoke. He said, it's not Mark who has asthenospermia. It's your ovaries that have problems, preventing you from having children. Mark will be back in 2 days. Sophia didn't say anything, but her face was already covered in tears. That night, she went crazy. Sometimes she was completely quiet, and other times she was raving, saying she was looking for someone. She even banged her head against the wall, saying she deserved to die. Now she has been transferred to a psychiatric hospital. The previous Sophia declared bankruptcy. Sophia's mother and Shu may seem to have fallen from heaven to hell. Selling all their jewelry and designer bags wasn't enough to pay off the debts, and they were hounded by debt collectors every day. On the day of the transformation, James lay on the operating table. He gently stroked Olivia's face and said, Olivia, thank you. He knew that the decision Olivia made was extremely difficult. Sophia would definitely not have been able to do it. Love is not about possession but about fulfillment, a truth Sophia never understood. Olivia shook her head, her eyes red. Watching James take the medicine, Olivia personally set up the equipment for him. Although she was extremely reluctant, she knew that James' time had come. She stepped back to the control room and placed her hand on the switch button. After a long while, she took a deep breath and pressed it with her eyes closed. James looked at the ceiling and slowly closed his eyes. A tear rolled down the corner of his eye. He still didn't have the courage to say I love you because he didn't want to be a burden to Olivia. James remained in a coma, and Olivia stayed by his side all the time. This was the first time she had conducted such an experiment, and she didn't have full confidence. Finally, 3 days later, he woke up. Olivia walked up to him cautiously, feeling both anticipation and fear. The moment he spoke, all of Olivia's hopes were shattered. "Ms. Olivia, how did I end up here?" Mark had really come back, and her James had completely disappeared. Mark almost forgot all about James and Sophia. Olivia helped him find his home. After this experiment, people would experience memory confusion for a while. Olivia had promised James to help Mark restore and piece together a complete picture of his life. Olivia took Mark back to the home that James had carefully decorated for him. He felt both familiar and strange. He couldn't remember when he had bought such a house where even the tiniest details in the corners were to his liking. He asked curiously, "Ms. Olivia, were we on good terms before?" Olivia smiled and said, "We were kind of like good friends." Mark nodded in a half-understanding way. There was so much blank in his mind that he didn't know where to start. But subconsciously, he felt that it might be better for him not to remember those things. Olivia took him to the basement and they got into the car that James had prepared for him. He sat nervously in the driver's seat and said, "Ms. Olivia, you must be mistaken. I can't drive." Olivia took out his vehicle license and driver's license from the drawer in front of the passenger seat and handed them to him. She said, "You've forgotten again. You can drive, and you're quite good at it." Although Mark had forgotten about James, the skills James had learned were passed on to him through what's known as muscle memory. He touched the steering wheel, subconsciously started the car, and after getting used to it, he exclaimed excitedly, "Ms. Olivia, I really can drive." Olivia selected a destination in the car's navigation, Mark's gallery. It seemed as if this road had been driven many times. Mark drove smoothly and subconsciously said, "Sure enough, the steering wheel should be in my own hands." This sentence sounded familiar to Olivia. She had heard James say it. In an instant, Olivia's nose felt sore. She looked out of the window. Although her heart was in turmoil, she could only force herself to remain calm. The journey was almost unobstructed, and they soon arrived at the gallery entrance. Olivia took out a key from the car and handed it to him. Mark covered his mouth in surprise and asked, "Is this gallery mine?" Olivia nodded with a smile. Mark said, "During the time I lost my memory, did I really do so many amazing things?" Olivia watched in silence as he opened the gallery door. A pet cat ran out of the house and rubbed affectionately against his arms. But after a while, the cat jumped down and wouldn't come back no matter how he coaxed it. Olivia felt a tightness in her heart. Besides her, the pet cat could also tell the difference between Mark and James. Mark started a peaceful life and was busy and fulfilled every day. He checked his bank account and was shocked by the long string of zeros. It seemed he had everything, but he still felt that something was missing. He devoted all his attention to the gallery, and his days were busy and relatively fulfilling. One day, he received an order for stored decorative paintings. When he went to deliver the paintings, the person who signed for them recognized him at a glance. The person said, "Mr. Mark, what are you doing here? How is Ms. Sophia?" Mark waved his hand and said, "You've got the wrong person. I don't know any Ms. Sophia." But the person wouldn't let it go. Then he showed Mark a photo of him and Sophia on his phone and said, "How could I be wrong? Ms. Sophia, Sophia. The guy in the photo looks exactly like you. Don't you know the woman next to you?" Mark took the receipt from the customer, said goodbye politely, and left in a hurry. At the mention of Sophia, a sharp pain shot through his temple. He squatted on the ground for a while before he could recover. When he got back to the store, he sat on the rocking chair in the gallery. The cat, which rarely did this, jumped onto his lap. He held the cat and fell into a deep sleep in the rocking chair. He had a dream. In the dream, there was a person who looked exactly like him and a woman with her back always turned to him. Every time he tried to see her face clearly, he would be woken up by a headache, as if some force was preventing him from exploring. In the following month, Olivia often came to the store to visit him. Each time, she would hug the pet cat, ask about his recent situation and the daily operations of the store. She told him to contact her if he needed any help. When she was about to leave, Mark gave her a painting. Olivia took it and thought of James. The painting depicted the first ray of morning light. James had promised to watch the sunrise with her, but they had never gotten around to it. Olivia controlled her emotions well and thanked him politely. She said, "Thank you, Mark. I'll be going now. Call me if you need anything." Mark smiled and waved goodbye to Olivia. There were tears glistening in his eyes as he said, "Goodbye, sister-in-law."